everyone. My name is Omar Shariar, and as well as being a freelance composer and researcher and member of RESEO, the European Network of Opera, Music and Dance Education, today I'm your host for this webinar, the second in a series of 3 organised by the EU Smart Composer project. So in this series, we'll be exploring the entrepreneurial mindset, cross-cutting issues around gender equality and climate change, and networking. These webinars form part of a preliminary introduction to an intensive 5-day training course that the EU Smart Composer project is running in Matera, Italy in September. But they're also intended to be standalone resources that anyone can access and make use of, which is why these webinars are recorded live and then posted online in the coming weeks. The EU Smart Composer project has been developed under the Erasmus Plus programme by 6 EU organisations with the aim of providing a practical tool to facilitate knowledge transfer between music educators who provide vocational educational training and music students who compose, thereby improving the employability of contemporary composers. The EU Smart Composer project is creating 3 intellectual outputs to achieve this aim: a literature review into VET music education in entrepreneurship, digital marketing and branding for music students who compose, which is the output 1. The EU Smart Composer project training scheme, of which these webinars are a part, and an accompanying handbook that will be published next year. Today's webinar will introduce the cross-cutting issues of climate change and gender equality, how these apply to professional composers, and what implications they have for the training of student composers. The content today will be presented by 2 of our EU Smart Composer project partners, MateraHub from Italy, which is a creative and creative and cultural industry consultancy represented today by Carlo Ferretti, as well as Coompanion from Sweden, a social enterprise consultancy represented today by Eva Westerberg. We'll also be hearing from Dr. Michelle Phillips, Senior Lecturer in Music Psychology at the Royal Northern College of Music and Principal Investigator of the START Entrepreneurship Project, as well as hearing an interview with Bernard Foccroulle, composer and previous intendant of the Festival d'Aix-en-Provence. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Carlo.
Thank you. Thank you, Omar. Hello, everyone. Very glad to be here. Some of you already know, some of you is on the other side of the virtual part. And I'm glad to having this minutes to not only present the work we did, but especially making some reflection with you about the topic of cross-cutting issue that is a really broad, I would like to say, approach. So we have different possibilities to approach it. So in order to do that, I would like to start with you with this reflection from my experience and from experience on MateraHub during this project. Because when we started investigating the role of the educational music school in Italy, I personally had the possibility to confront and to know the story about several musicians and composers in those schools, understanding what was their opinion about the educational part, and what this educational institute can do better and for them and can introduce in the educational path. And all of that underline the importance of transdisciplinarity and the fact that most of this container did not approach in this way. So we are able to approach this generally. I use this example. We used to still, at least in places in Italy, but I'm quite sure that this could be expanded to other countries too. We are able to approach these disciplines and just container silos still now. That's why there are projects like Smart Composer. The complexity of the real world today does not give us the possibility to do not approach the knowledge and the production in a transdisciplinary way. And the artist and the musician, of course, has a really fundamental role. So there are several studies actually about the art approach, and this is the topic I would like to confront with you today. These studies are like, there is a European project, Horizon project, called it Arts Formation, that actually is investigating this approach. But there are institutions like Ars Electronica that did, our institution here in this project are on this wave, I would like to say, about the art approach. What does it mean, the art approach? Is intending the art not only as a content, not only as a production, but an approach to investigate the world and to investigate the reality and to investigate the problems that our society has today. We know there are main problems, and we can be active and approaching it as the ecological problem, but I will arrive to that point later. So the art approach is starting from the artistic production and understanding how art production can be an approach to other disciplines and fields. And understanding this point is important for two reasons. First of all, artists are broader of creativity. And creativity, as Csikszentmihalyi, for example, which is an American psychologist, like he investigates the role of creativity in our society. Creativity is the element, fundamental element, to speed up the processes and to find other solutions to problems. But it is also a really important social glue, creativity. As we know, creativity is and emerged from social capitals and from social containers. So the first of all, it's important to understand that the role of the artist is definitely important to move and to spread creativity into other kind of disciplines and places and situations where human knowledge can spread up. And the other thing is to rethink the role of the artist as a professional. That is what actually we did during the USmart Composer project, specifically, of course, on composer and musician. So the role of the artist today is going to change, and is changing from the last 50 years. Like the history is full of this kind of example, like starting from the 70s. There are several examples in the US and UK of for example, the relation between enterprises and artists. The artists were invited into the enterprises to be actually a kind of promoter of creativity, or to test some processes and content. Like I'm telling to you this as an example of like I would like to say like the connection between different worlds, like in our imagination, like so different worlds as a manufacturing industry and the artist. The reality, as we know today, is that like again, worlds can be totally integrated, and the role of the artist is extremely important to do that. I would like to give you another example. That I mean, for me, it's really important. That is Arts for CERN. CERN, the Scientific Research Center, every year organize residencies with artists into that. Actually, to not only like produce new kind of content and facilitate the approach of people to science, but also to speed up innovation, to speed up like scientific processes. So we now have an important role that is like living at home, our way, the way we started, that for sure was like I can say a divided discipline way of studying, living at home and being a promoter of a different approach and a promoter of the role of the artist outside just their artistic production. And this is even more important today, especially in relation to social rights and ecological parts. And I will try to make you other example in this concern, especially for the ecological part. We have two possibilities today in terms of how arts can approach the ecological problems that we have today. And the first of all is introducing a circular and ecological sustainability into the artistic production. Think about, for example, a theater, and this is what we will talk later in the talk we have, and the case we are going to present later. So think about a theater and how important it is to be as sustainable in the production and scenography, in the way we I don't know, for example, we use the water bottle, the ticket, all the things. We have to understand that all of us has right now a role into the ecological transformation. But there is another thing that is connected with what we said before. Again, the power of arts and the artist, not only to enlighten the problems through the artistic production, but being an activist into this process. And there are several artists that actually are activists in both the ecological rights challenge and the social rights challenge. And again, there is like, of course, there is this role that artists can have, but there is even like a role that the artists can have in terms of understanding and spinning up the innovation to arrive to new technologies that can facilitate the ecological transformation. So today we are in a really important moment and a turning point for several things, as we know. We have to be aware that the artist is a proactive and really important role into the society. So we have to start stopping thinking about art just as like a little, I would like to say, a little stone isolated that produce just content, artistic content, but thinking about the fact that it's totally integrated in our society, in our innovation processes, in our production. And so as that, it's important to start, and this is, I connect in order even to finish with the beginning, it's really important to start from the educational part. And this is what I think, in my opinion, what the Smart Composers is doing. And so that's why I'm glad the MateraHub is part of this project and this process.
Super, great. Thank you so much, Carlo, for this introduction. That sounds fascinating. I love personally the idea that artistic creativity can inspire creativity in other fields. That sounds like a very pertinent concept. Now, I think we have an interview which you conducted, Carlo, with Bernard Foccroulle.
I really enjoyed to have this conversation. I hope that you enjoyed as much as I did. And I will just make two comments about that. It was, I think, really important, and this is could be a conversation that we can have together, but even for the future, to have this kind of project, and especially habit other opera houses that are the hardware, as we said during the interview, move to a more sustainable production. It's not something that we cannot take into consideration, because of course we are talking about opera today, but this could be spread in general to other cultural center. And the other thing that I think was important is what Bernard said about the artist and the role that they had. And once again, like connecting with what I said before, as a purpose of intending the artist not only as a producer, but as thinker and driver for new, I would like to say, for innovation and for new concept that can be brought into our society. Welcome, I'm Carlo Ferretti from MateraHub. I had really the pleasure to be with Bernard Foccroulle today. Hello, Bernard.
Hello, Roberto.
Bernard is a great composer, and we are here today in order to talk about his project Cassandra. So I would like to start, Bernard, asking to you, what is the project Cassandra?
Cassandra is an opera that I imagined 2 years ago, or a little bit more, just at the beginning of the pandemic. I've been interested for a long time by the figure of Cassandra. And strange enough, I think it's one of the most interesting and actual mythological figures, and one of the less used by opera composers since more than 400 years. It's a very actual figure because it's a sort of a paradigm of non-being understood, of non-being listened to, and it's very interesting and moving to see how permanent this kind of figure, of this kind of non-being heard characteristic remain constant in the history of the mankind, from the mythology until our time. Or to take a few examples, scientists that in the Renaissance have presented new facts, they were killed, like Giordano Bruno was killed in Rome because he was pretending that it was the earth turning around the sun and not the opposite. He was killed for that. And yeah, I think others were also in big danger. Today, it seems that there is a sort of multiplication of that. So my opera is primarily a sort of is about the tragedy of not being understood or heard when you have a truth to tell. It's not just about thinking about this and believing that. No, it's about having a truth. This can be science, can be other things. Of course, today, the biggest problem that we are facing is about the global warming and about the climate crisis. But my opera is not so much directly about the climate crisis. It's about the tragedy of having a truth and not being heard. So it's a double tragedy. It's a tragedy for the individual who is not understood. It's also the tragedy for those who are living and don't pay attention enough and are going exactly directly into their own tragedy. That was the case with the family of Cassandra in Troy, where they were all destroyed by the war, what he had predicted. And I very much believed, I'm very much afraid that we are doing exactly the same today. We are going right and very rapidly into the crisis, into a much bigger crisis than what we have now. And we are not able to listen, to understand, and to change our behavior.
Sure, I think that this, I mean, there are several even like pop references today about this relation with the scientific news, I would like to say. But Cassandra could be a scientist, but could be even an artist. I mean, Bernard, what's the role of the artist, in your opinion, today in relation to the topic of the climate change? What the artists can do or they are doing right now?
Yeah, maybe before answering your question about that, I have to add a precision. When we started with Mathieu Josselin, who is the librettist of the opera, when we started thinking about this opera, we hesitated first, should we make just an opera about the mythological figure or about a contemporary figure who would be a contemporary Cassandra? And we decided to do both, to have two singers, one playing the role, singing the role of the mythological Cassandra, one playing the role of a young scientist who is also an activist. So we have two women, we have more characters, of course, but these are the two main characters, and there is an alternance between mythological scenes and contemporary scenes, and at the end, both women will meet and will maybe for the first time understand or be understood by the other one. So this is so scientists are in this case important. And 2 years ago, when we started the process, I found it interesting to be in touch with a scientist, a very well-known Belgian climatologist, who helped us in the libretto, but also with a few young activists. We have in Belgium a very dynamic and active group of activists about the climate. So the group is called Belgian Youth for Climate. And they have been able to put a lot of people in the streets just before the pandemic. Then the pandemic stopped, made it more difficult for them. But they were quite important. They were good friends with Greta Thunberg. So I thought it's an opportunity to write something today, not completely isolated in my own studio, in my own house, but also being in touch and hearing, listening to people who I think are very important in nowadays. So I don't see myself as having a truth. I'm an artist and I'm not a scientist. But trying to listen to scientists, I think, is important, and trying to understand what is specific in their in their vision of the world, in their understanding of the process that we are now part of. To do that, I think, was a very enriching process. But of course, I've been composing my own opera. So at the end, it's not an individual work because it's done with a librettist, a dramaturge, with a stage director and a conductor and singers. So we are already in a team, but I am the only responsible for writing. Your question about the role of a composer is a very delicate question, because I would not like composers today to be used, for any ideology, even if it's a good ideology. I think it's important to keep the autonomy of the artist. But at the same time, I think it's important for the artist to be aware of the challenges of our time. And as we see also in the history of opera, people like Mozart, Gluck, Verdi, and many others, they have been mirroring the situation, the social and the political aspects of their time, or sometimes also the problems between man and woman, between generations. So I think composers always have been, consciously or not, part of an evolution of the mentalities. Probably it's the same today, so that's not new. But I'm not an activist. I am an artist. I respect very much activists, and I think we need them. But this is not an opera composed by an activist. I think it's important to make the difference. And I hope that the people who will come to watch, to attend it, will also include activists. I very much hope so, but it will be probably perceived and understood in different ways by the different people, by the different groups of listeners, spectators.
Bernard, I think you are, of course, with the artists that are engaged in the production of the opera, perfect example of how artists can interact with the current problems. There are several other examples, but the way artists can filter the main problems of today and give back to people. I'm really curious about, because you mentioned before about the production process. I would like to understand even more what influenced this work, how even the people interact with each other. I mean, even the artists that were engaged about the problem. Yeah.
So 2 years ago, I contacted a scientist and a few young activists, and I told them about our opera, and I asked them some questions. So we had a lot of Zoom meetings and also exchanges by mail at the very beginning of writing the libretto. So I think those conversations have been influencing our understanding of the life of a young activist today, about the obstacles, about the kind of fights that they have to go through. And the same with the scientists. It was very moving for me to ask the scientist, the climatologist, who is now maybe 60 years old, have you been understood? And he told me that since more than 40 years, I say the same, and I've never been really taken seriously by decision makers, and not only me, but the whole community of scientists feel very much so that they have not been really taken seriously and listened to. It's maybe changing a little bit today, but it's very late and very fragile. So I think the experience of speaking with those kind of people was very important for us. Then after the libretto has been written, we sent the libretto, even when it was not completely written, but sometimes scene by scene, to our partners, asking for some feedback, and we got some feedback, both from the scientists and from the young activists. So I think that was the sort of a first phase. Then I also suggested La Monnaie, the opera house of Brussels, who is producing and commissioning this opera. I told them, I told Peter de Caluet, it would be really wonderful if you could offer this group of young activists to be part of, to have an opportunity to create their own project, because I don't pretend, I don't want to use them in my opera. I think it would be sort of demagogy to invite them to be on stage in my piece. I think it's not right. I do my piece with the elements that I choose, I filter, I assembly, and that will be my opera. But at the same time, with the respect for their own contribution, it might be very interesting to give them an opportunity to come, to speak, to maybe to make a theater play or an exhibition. I don't know, that would be their own decision. And I think they are still working on that. And I hope, not sure, but I hope that they will find the time and the energy to create something that could be presented at the same time as our opera by La Monnaie, at La Monnaie, or in another cultural space in Brussels. And I think that in that case, both cultural events would profit from the light of the other. And it's quite rare to have that opportunity. So I very much hope they will. I know they are extremely busy, all of them. So I sometimes doubt whether they will have the time to do that. But if they do, I think it will be very profitable for both them, us, and the population.
Definitely, I totally agree. And this story, there is another, I would like to say, stakeholder that you mentioned. It was Le Monet, the opera house. that I think, but you will then confirm, had a really specific and important role in the production of the opera, but like bringing the principles of how to, I would like to say, produce a green opera into this project. So even starting from the experience that we have around Europe, but especially here in Italy, that is still complicated about like talking about green principles or introduction of sustainability principles in the production, especially of the opera. I would like to ask you, let us understand better what's the green principle of Le Monet and how they influence your production.
A very good point is that La Monnaie is, since now quite many years, engaged in a green process. So it's a green opera house in many ways, still proceeding and trying to become better and better. But already now there is a very interesting change in the mentalities within the people of La Monnaie, about administration, technicians, the workshops, the artistic side. They try really to be as respectful as possible to the environment. So this opera for them comes also at a good, very good point. And they have decided, they have asked the stage director and her team to make a set that would be as green as possible, with a lot of recuperation and with recycling elements. And this is a challenge that has been taken very seriously by Marie-Ève Signerol, who is the stage director, and her team. And I think it will be quite an example of how you can make opera today with a kind of respect to an environment that was even not possible to imagine 20 years ago. So seen from that point of view, there is an interesting evolution. Of course, it's very minimal, it's very minor. It doesn't solve the whole problem, but it's a way to be coherent, you know, between what you do, what you pretend, between the values that you pretend to respect and how you work.
Definitely. And I think this is both the opera house and the project as a great example that could be applied, or at least showed around Europe. So I'm really happy that today we had the possibility to have a conversation with you, and I hope to spread actually the word. Let me just the last question, Bernard. When will be produced and will be definitely published the opera?
So I should finish my work of the composition at the end of this year, and the premiere of the opera is planned on the 12th of September next year, 2023. So we have a complete cast of singers. The project is already very advanced on the level of scenography and dramaturgy. So I think we have been proceeding very well. And in addition to what you just said, I'm also very happy and sensitive to the fact that I see more and more projects coming, artistic projects in Europe coming, that are reflecting those issues, those challenges. I see that at many levels. I'm now in the jury of a Federal Prize about education projects, and I see the same. There is a move in the society. There is a movement. I very much hope that we will increase that. And if art can be just modestly part of that process, I think it's even better.
It's definitely important to, as we said before, to making even more accessible some topic to people and to different kind of people. But this story is really, really important that I would like to say, to share, especially for the tandem that you created, that is important to have, like the content and the software and the hardware, I would like to say. So the opera and the opera house, and the influence that have on each other. So we hope that other, as you say, other opera house and other opera projects around Europe will follow this path. Bernard, thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you very much for this meeting.
To be with us, and we will definitely hope to be in September in 2023 in Brussels. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much, Carlo, for that. That's absolutely fascinating. What a refreshing perspective as well from Bernard, sharing the artistic space quite deliberately with, as you said, this kind of extra musical, social, activists, essentially. Really, really fascinating and inspiring. I would like to invite Michelle Phillips, Senior Lecturer from Royal Northern College of Music.
Thank you very, very much for the invite to be here. And what a fantastic project and a fantastic group of people. And I've really appreciated the conversations that we've had with Omar and others sharing knowledge around this area of entrepreneurship training and music. So I'm going to give you a bit of context, and then I'm going to tell you about this entrepreneurship project. So I'm sure you're aware of lots of this research, but there is a general recognition, and this report is a really nice one, that the arts industries were hit really hard by COVID. Lots of jobs were lost, lots of organisations struggled to survive. And I love this second quote on the right, which says that culture's value as a global public good must be cherished and preserved for the benefit of present and future generations. So this is an important part of the context of the project. How do we make sure that the cultural industries are supported, especially given all the damage that COVID has done? And we also know from COVID that music is one of the things that really got people through that very difficult period, from people singing on balconies and to people who used music to give them a sense of to regulate their emotions during COVID, and a sense of being together. So everybody who went and played music out on the street, COVID has really hammered home the value of cultural engagement in the lives of humans. And finally, we've got some really nice research coming out of COVID that shows us once again that our engagement with the arts is not just about having a nice time. It's actually about something more fundamental. It's about well-being and health. And there was this really nice study that was done over COVID, which suggests that simply listening to music can relieve some of the symptoms of loneliness, because listening to music can give you a sense of being with other people, which for me is quite magic. That whole idea that music can do that for us is exciting. And I'll show you one more piece of research that is useful context for this START project. And this is a summary of some research that enterprise educators put together, which shows that if you look at graduates and the industries and the types of work they go into, music students have the highest proportion of graduates who go on to be self-employed, so 31%. So what that tells us, and this is relatively new research released last year, what that tells us is that students graduating with music degrees could be seen to be more in need of skills around what it means to be a kind of freelance musician, what it means to have networking skills and project management skills and budgeting skills. So there's a real urgency to prepare those students to go into those industries that they're already going into in order to make sure our cultural sector continues to thrive. And this final one, before I just summarize this context, is a report from the APPG group. So they're a governmental group on entrepreneurship education, and they're a very effective group. And they publish some really nice stats and reports around the value of entrepreneurship education. And what their report shows is that actually there is a real need for entrepreneurship and enterprise related education in universities, but not many students are getting access to that. So this report is not just art students, not just music students, it's all students. So there is a gap. university students are not getting enough access to this kind of education. So just a summary of that wider context. So we know that the creative industries are really important, and there's a statistic on for the UK industry in particular. We know that COVID has made that very difficult. And we know that the creative industries bring value, and some of that value is health and well-being, social, cultural value. And we know that people who do undertake arts degrees, for example, music degrees, do go on to be self-employed. But there's insufficient training in this. And we also know that there are lots of barriers in terms of gender and in terms of race and cultural background of students who are engaging with this kind of thing. So this is the kind of wider context for the project that I'll just tell you a little bit about now. So where do we go from here? These were the three aims of this project. So the Start Entrepreneurship project is a project we designed in 2019, so just before the pandemic hit. And we applied to a funding call from the Office for Students and Research England in the UK, and they were offering a pot of £10 million to support projects in knowledge exchange. So knowledge exchange has become very trendy in the UK and very important. And it's all about that idea of students engaging with the world outside of the institution, outside of academia. So students working with industry partners or with communities. And we applied to lead this project from the RNCM, which is a music conservatoire in Manchester. We have about 900 students. And with partners, so with two partners, the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London, which is about a similar size to the RNCM and trains theatre and drama students, and the University of the Arts London, which is a very large institution in London, which trains students in lots of disciplines, from photography to fashion to communication. So there were three institutional partners, and we were very surprised and also very pleased to be awarded £900,000. So these were the aims of the project. It's a 2-year project. It is now coming to an end in August, which is nice because I can share some of the findings with you. So there were three aims. One was to develop new initiatives in how you train arts students in entrepreneurial skills. One was to help the students themselves to develop mindsets and behaviours and attitudes in this area. And one was to share. So to share what we find with the wider creative industry sector in the UK. So, you know, it's another reason why it's lovely to be here today, because this is one of our main aims, to share our work and our findings. So the project has been running since September 2020. And of course, it's run slightly differently to how we imagined it, because it's largely run online, which has worked in some nice ways for us and not in others. But what we've been able to do is still, I think, something to really be proud of. So you can see at the bottom there, we've delivered over 15,000 hours of engagement with students. We've put on about 624 events. We've worked with a lot of new industry partners. So people like theatre companies and people who run music ensembles and orchestras. And we've produced a lot of new materials, so designs for workshops and lectures and seminars. And these are the kinds of things that we've done here in this list. So we've done things like, we've grown the number of placements that we offer to our students. We've developed initiatives like Start Conversations, which is new, which is a bi-weekly clinic where students can just drop in and talk about their projects, talk about what they're developing. And we invite industry partners along to advise the students. And we've got new mentoring opportunities where if students come to us and say, oh, I'd love to start a new charity that looks at something like this, we can pair them up with an industry mentor. Speed networking has been very fun and works really well with Zoom breakout rooms. We've grown the awards. There's an entrepreneurship award at the RNCM and there's one at Central. We've been able to grow those. And we've put on things like this poster on the right, which was a weekend entrepreneurship bootcamp, which was really, really good fun with students from across all three institutions and staff. So we've experimented with what an entrepreneurship bootcamp looks like for creative students in particular. We've put on a lot of activities around increasing accessibility and inclusion. And Royal Central School of Speech and Drama have led some really fantastic Black and Global Majority workshops. And we've delivered lots of new content. So that's an overview of the kinds of activities that we've put on as part of the project. And I'll go on and tell you about some of the ways we designed those and then some of the findings. We were really heavily influenced in this design by the QAA framework in the UK. So we have a set of QAA principles and what we call subject benchmark statements in the UK, which degree programs use when they're designed. And this was a really nice model that we used to design what we were doing. The idea that students should go through this journey from just being aware of what entrepreneurship and enterprise is. And we've used those terms very, very broadly. We've used them to basically mean all of the skills around being a freelancer, from budgeting to the kind of soft skills of influencing people in networking. And we've also not used the term enterprise and entrepreneurship with students, because we found quite early on in the project that they're not the right words in order to get students engaged. So we tend to use creativity and innovation. So to take students through this journey from being aware of the need for these skills to developing a mindset that embraces these skills, to then trying them out, so doing things like placements and running their own projects, and then being able to reflect and to see how much progress they've made, and to look at the journey that they've been on and how that can feed into their life as a freelance artist. We've used EntreComp a lot. So EntreComp's been very, very useful for us. And I'll give you one example, which is that I developed with my colleague, Hannah McCabe, a new year 3 placement option for music students at the RNCM, where we would take them on a journey from idea generation to pitching a project or a business or a new product. And we used EntreComp very explicitly. We talked to the students about it in the first class, and we said, look, in this class, we're going to cover these aspects of the entrepreneurship of the EntreComp framework. And we move from ideas and opportunities through resources through into action. So we've made it a really present part of that module. That was a 10-week, 20-hour module. So it's been very, very useful to us, and we're really grateful to everyone who developed that and made it freely available. So what have we found so far? I'm just going to show you 3 of our main findings and talk you through these, and then I'm going to go on to talk about access and inclusion that Omar mentioned, which has become one of our main focuses. So 3 of the things that we found that have come out really strongly in the project is that there is a real need for creative students to be taught how to manage uncertainty. And actually, that's something that we found a lot of degree programs don't do very well, because we're so heavily regulated. We need to give students a degree handbook and a module outline and an assessment framework. There isn't a lot of room within what we do in education to do something that is unplanned or surprising or spontaneous, because we are held to these quality assurance standards. And yet COVID has taught us it's really vital that we prepare students to cope with things being different and managing uncertainty. So some of the ways that we've done that is we've talked a lot to the students about effectual logic. So this idea of, you don't necessarily need to start by thinking, where's the gap in the industry and how can I fill it? You can simply start by thinking, what do I have? What are my resources? What are my passions? What are my strengths? What are my beliefs and values? Who do I know? And you can simply start with what you have and then think about how you can apply that. So effectual logic has been a big part of how we've tried to help students to develop skills in being adaptable. And we've tried as far as possible to allow them opportunities to fail. And one of the ways that we've done that is, for a lot of the assessments that we've run, we've not assessed the project itself. So for example, in that year 3 class that I mentioned, we don't assess the project or the pitch that they do at the end. We only assess their reflection of what they've learned. And I think if your assessment is based around reflection rather than the output, then students can be free to fail. Because if they come up with an extremely ambitious project and it all goes very wrong, they still have exactly the same access to the same marks and the marking criteria, because failure is such a useful thing that they can reflect on. So that's been one of our main learning points. It's really important to introduce ways that you can help students to be resilient and manage uncertainty. We've learned, and I'm sure this is really familiar to lots of you here, and we heard aspects of this in the last presentation, which was really interesting. This idea that artists are slightly different. And you can't just take a module from a business school and give it to a composer, because it won't be relatable and they won't identify with it, they won't get much from it. And Ruth Bridgestock has done a lot of research in this area, and this is a nice quote of hers. She says, for the artist, the practice of entrepreneurship is multi-layered and qualitatively different from the practice of entrepreneurship in the traditional business sense. So we've definitely found that working with students across all 3 of those institutions, it's not useful for us to take business school models and put them into our institutions. And it's also not useful for us to talk about profit or about entrepreneurship or business. What's useful is for us to talk about idea generation and creativity and innovation and new ideas. Those are the kinds of ways that our artistic students identify with what we're trying to do. And then 3rd of our main learning points is that quite often we shy away, or we don't recognize the need to talk to creative industries students about money. And quite often what degree programs do is that they bring students in year 1 and year 2, and they do lots of modules in things like their own technique and their own artistic practice. And they might do modules in theory and practice and history around music. But what we don't do often enough is introduce them to the idea of a tax return or a project budget. And we tend to do that in the later stages of a degree program, which is a bit too late, really. I do all the tax lectures and seminars at the RNCM because I have another hat as a chartered accountant. And what I tend to find is that students graduate, and then I get an email, I had one last week actually, from someone who's graduated that says, oh, I've got to fill in my tax return. And I remember you did a lecture on that and I've forgotten all the details, and please could you help me? And so what we've done as part of this project is we've put that kind of gentle awareness of money and of being a freelancer or a sole trader right into year 1. So we've got a whole set of new modules at the RNCM, which we have some seminars, and we've almost done these like games which introduce students to the idea of how do you put together a quote if someone wants you to play at their wedding, and how do you respond to an invitation from a business that wants to pay you to play at their Christmas party. So we've tried to break down that idea of money as being a taboo subject and developing an awareness in students right from day 1. Okay, I'm going to move on and talk. The last thing I'll talk about is our initiatives around access and inclusion, and this one is one of the things me and Omar have discussed. And I'll tell you very honestly that the project, when we designed it, the START project, really didn't have a focus on access and inclusion. And we were writing this project bid towards the end of 2019. And it was just at that time when all of the George Floyd stuff was in the press, all of that tragedy, and awareness was suddenly much better of the need to make things open to everyone and also accessible by everyone. So it became really clear to us that we hadn't really included enough focus on EDI in our project. But this was a nice opportunity, I think, for us to make changes. And what the funder got in touch with us, the Office for Students and Research England, and said, we would really like to look at your project specifically in terms of access and inclusion. So there were lots of reasons why we put new initiatives into the project. And these are some of the things that we did. We had an advisory board as part of the project, and we paid that advisory board. And what we soon realized was that we didn't have anyone on that advisory board that had expertise in access and inclusion. But of all the tragic things about COVID, one of the good things for our project was, because everything moved online, we had a lot of money that we didn't anticipate having available, because a lot of our budget was allocated to in-person events and to bring in students from London to Manchester and vice versa. So we had a lot of money that we could reallocate. So we recruited an extra advisory board member, Kevin Osborne, who became our expert in diversity, which was fantastic. When we ran our weekend entrepreneurship bootcamp, we had 3 keynote talks, and we paid somebody to come along and do live captions. So rather than relying on the automatic captions, we paid somebody to do that. And we had a live BSL sign language, British Sign Language interpreter. So when we broadcast these keynote talks, and we broadcast them publicly as well as to the students, we had 2 pinned windows. One was the speaker and one was the BSL interpreter. And that, I think that was something that we were very happy to have done, but actually we learned a lot from that. And one of the things we learned was that we could have made that much more effective. And one of the presentations that she signed for ran over in terms of timing, and she said that, that's not good practice for somebody to have to sign for that length of time. So we learned lots of different things about how we could better incorporate British Sign Language. We have 2 researchers as part of this project, which is absolutely fantastic, Nicola Pennell and Keith Phillips. So we've got a large research and evaluation element in this project. And we developed new ways of capturing new data. And I'll just tell you about one of those that we're doing at the moment. One of the things that we're now doing is we're looking at why students haven't come along to any of our START activities. So why haven't they come along to our bootcamp, our entrepreneurship bootcamp? Why didn't they come to our drop-in sessions? Why didn't they take part in our awards? And what we're particularly interested in is whether there are any barriers to access. So we've just got the ethical approval for this study, and this is the main focus of our last few months. And for this, what we'll do is we're sending this out, and we aim to have 600 students respond. We're paying them £10 in food vouchers to respond to our survey, which will hopefully incentivize them to respond. And we've got a list of possible barriers to access that we've taken from existing research. And they include things like, I wasn't aware this event was happening, but they also include things like, I don't see anyone who looks like me in this kind of field or this kind of activity, or my own caring responsibilities prevent me from accessing activities at weekends. So we really hope that the data we get from that will give us a really clear picture of possible barriers to access and inclusion. We tried all the way through the project to let the students lead, and we have a student advisory board that we pay. So we've got a set of students across all 3 institutions who are paid to be our advisors. And we really try and let them lead wherever we can. So if a student has said, well, this is what I would like as part of the project, we try as far as we can to accommodate that. And I think sometimes we really do underestimate how much we can learn from students. And there's a slight, I would go as far as to say, you tend to find sometimes in teaching approaches, there's quite an arrogance in assuming that knowledge can only go one way from staff to student. And I think that's something that we've really tried to fight against. And I've just put this lovely quote from one of our student advisors, Joanna, who's taken part in lots of our activities. And I think, I won't read this out, but I think what this quote shows really nicely is that idea that hopefully the students have felt that they are actually advisors. You know, they're free to say whatever they think about the activities. We will take those on board, and we will alter what we do as part of the project in response to those. So I've got 2 more slides. This is a summary of where we're up to so far with our recommendations coming out of the project, which you can probably guess by now. So we think there is a need for better embedding of freelance skills in order to make sure that students can still bolster that really important creative industry. It's really important for students to work with the real music industry during their training, or with the drama industry, fashion industry. It's really important that these kinds of activities are supported, that there's support for student-led projects, especially because the students now, I find, are really incredible in what they want to do with their art. They want to have social impact quite often. They want to change the world. They want to work with marginalized communities and with groups that perhaps don't have access to art. And I mean, for me, that's total job satisfaction. If I can support and work with students who will then go on to change the world, then that's an absolute joy for me. But it's really important that we look at how we can support students as they go out into the real world. And one of the things we found to be really important is that the mentors that we pair the students up with are not the big shining stars, but that they are recent graduates. They are relatable to by the students. And it's really important, if we can bolster this workforce and these incredible graduates, this will have an impact on loneliness, on community, on social bonding. So finally, these are the things that we're doing now. So we're finishing off a longitudinal study, data collection on students' career intentions and preparation, and to the extent to which students come into a degree program with one career intention, and by year 3 or 4 that's changed. We're looking at the extent to which that changes. And we're also looking at the way in which we can do more on accommodating individual artistic identity and student-led activity. And I'm going to leave the last word with Olivia Hamblin, who is one of our final year vocal students. And Liv Hamblin came into year 3 of her degree studies. We have a 4-year degree. She came into year 3 and she had never done anything in terms of thinking about setting up her own project or business or charity. And she joined that year 3 module that I mentioned, and she joined a lot of the START activities. And as a result of that, she won our entrepreneurship award, which we call the Creative Innovator Award. And she set up her own charity, which she's now registered with the Charity Commission. And she's got her own advisory board, which is called Musicians' Minds Together. So for me, that's totally emblematic of everything the START project intends to do. And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That is incredibly inspiring. Yes, we're so delighted to hear the ways that the research that you've been doing is having already such a profound effect on the students. And I'm sure we're going to have some questions about that in a moment. I would just like to ask now Ebba to have a final word before I'll open the floor up to some questions.
I totally agree. Thank you so much for very inspiring speakers so far. It's really fantastic to hear all these initiatives and projects going on, and operas and everything. Very inspiring. Thank you very much. And so to wrap this webinar up, I'm going to deliver some examples on gender equality from our Swedish viewpoint. And it's not so much about actual maybe composers' activities, but networking and organizations and stuff like that. So, and I'll try to be not very long, because this is also recorded and everyone can look at it afterwards. And I put some web addresses in the slides, so you will be able to go back and look further into it. My first example is, and also maybe I should say that I'm a project leader at Coompanion, one of the partner organizations from EU Smart Composer project, and our project leader is Diana. She's also attending this webinar. I'm also a project leader, but not for this project, but other projects that are related to music, because I'm also a freelance musician, percussionist. So I have a lot of contacts in the music world in Sweden. My first example of this gender equality from different organizations is the FST, Swedish Society of Composers. And they have, as a result of all these Me Too, maybe discussions and so on, they have a support service where you can get 5 hours support for free if you have experienced some kind of sexual abuse or anything like that. And this is for the members of the Society of Composers. So it's actually a support service for Swedish composers, which is, I think, pretty unique. I haven't heard of it. And they also have a very simple Google form to make a report if you have experienced something that you want to report, so that they, in the extension of that, they get good statistics about what is going on in the composers' world in Sweden. So that is one initiative that I think is very interesting. They have also signed a key change pledge. I don't know if you have heard of the key change organization. They are a EU project, and there's the web address, keychange.eu, and they have a lot of tips for organizations, festivals, and everyone that want to take on the challenge of working towards equality. And let me see, how do I get to the next? Doesn't work here. Wow. So as you can see, they have ideas about a dozen of things that you can do, like use 50%, have a 50% target for composers' commissions. Concert halls could look up at lineups on stage, as their key change festivals have done. Conservators could look at students, lecturers, senior staff, teams, live music programs, etc. And agents, publishers, labels consider the balance of the artists they sign. Charities or trade bodies could consider the makeup of their boards. Broadcasters can take up the pledge and look at who they invite, and so on and so on. So this is a lot of good ideas that you can get. And if you want to commission really to make a change within your own organization, you can take on that key change pledge. Next example, KVAST, the Swedish Association of Women Composers. And one of the persons that we have interviewed and that was attending the last webinar, he's also actually a board member of this organization. So it's the Swedish Association of Women Composers. They have a very good webpage where they work with this that you mentioned, Michelle. I don't see anyone that looks like me idea to put a list of composers, and they have statistics, what music do the orchestras play and all that. A lot of knowledge from history, repertoire banks, from both historical, what composers have been forgotten in the history books and stuff like that, and also to make a repertoire bank of over contemporary composers in Sweden today that are women. So it's very inspiring and a very good help to have a look at that that webpage for inspiration, and I also have Spotify and YouTube lists, and there are some parts that is in English also. And in the field of jazz and improvised music, where I'm also active, there's another nonprofit association with the purpose of supporting and promoting musicians who identify as women, transgender, or non-binary. Is that how we pronounce it in English? And who are active in the jazz and improvised music scene. The name of that organization is IMPRA. And we had formerly in other areas also, it was like this, it was like an agency. If you were looking for a speaker or a politician or anything, they had lists of different professions where you could look. So this is kind of the music version of that. So that's also very helpful. And IMPRA, they say that they want to make visible support and act as a platform for musicians, offer training in gender awareness in the field of music, organize seminars, panel debates, member meetings, and provide an active debate in society about gender issues in the jazz world. And then we have for other genres, there are so many festivals in Sweden and all over the world. And here we have an organization that is called Jämställd Festival. More or less, it's translated to Gender Equal Festival. And they have between 2012 and 2017, they have gathered statistics yearly and made yearly reports on the gender balance on the 10 biggest music festivals in Sweden. And after that, I think the situation actually, at least the awareness and also the actual outcome of music presented at festivals and so on has actually changed at the pop and rock and other festivals in Sweden. So it actually makes an impact. So it's good to see that statistics can be one part, and then to see how it evolves from that. And there was a lot of discussions for a while. Actually, there was a festival that was that men were not permitted at all, which raised a lot of discussions in this country. And but it also, it's a way of increasing the awareness of these issues, of course. And I know that the organization that I mentioned, KVAST, the Swedish women composers, they have a lot of exchange with this Donne in Musica, which I bring in because we have also Italian friends in our EU Smart Composer. And I haven't personally any experience from this organization, but it's they have been there for a long time, and they do a lot of international cooperation projects and so on. So it's also worth looking into. Very, very short, some examples from the Swedish arena. Yeah, shall we, the last minutes, let everyone ask all the different questions that you now have in mind.
Absolutely, Eva. Thank you so much for introducing us to giving us that range of how organizations in Sweden and abroad, as you say, are tackling the issue of gender equality in music making. We have so many things to think about and engage with. And actually, I might begin, if I may, to taking up the question that Ella put in the chat and ask it perhaps in a broader sense. Again, to Michelle, I know that you've answered directly. So Ella asked the question of whether the work that's going on at RNCM also is available to people in the middle of their career. And I guess you answered the not yet. I would ask the question even further, like, how can it be? Have you had that question before? What is the implication for those in the industry already who are in their careers, who don't have these skills? How can we give them the skills, essentially, is my question.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. Thank you, Ella. And yeah, and good point, Soma. And I think it's something that it's a really important thing for us to think about now, and we haven't really done much. So being able to talk to all of you here and to have spoken to Omar a bit about this before is so useful to be sharing that kind of expertise. And I'm very grateful. Thank you, Omar. I think there are lots of ways that we could think about this, because one of the things that has become really clear throughout the project is that one of the most effective things we've done with students is just give them the time and space to work with each other, and we've kind of used different tools to sort of stimulate how they think about their future careers and possible new ideas. And all of that is absolutely translatable, not just into professional artists, musicians, but to other walks of life as well. So we've vaguely talked about this idea that we could create some sort of online content or some sort of series of workshops that could be accessed by the general public even, or by our alumni, or by professional musicians in general. And I think there's plenty of scope there, especially because what we're doing is not necessarily a one-way flow of information. We're not necessarily saying, look, here's how you do this, here's how you do that. It's about stimulating and giving people that space to be creative and to think of new ideas. And that's useful for all of us, isn't it? So yeah, it seems like there's lots of scope. I'd love to hear any ideas people have.
Thank you so much. So let's open up a little bit further then. Are there any other questions either on this subject or going back on other things that Deanna has a question? I invite you, Deanna.
Yes, thank you, Omar. It's both most like a question and a reflection at the same time. I was thinking about the question that Ella had and your response, Michelle. Nice to see you again, by the way. And I'm thinking that maybe the thing that we should be thinking about is to create a kind of community, like around these entrepreneurship issues for those people who are in the middle of their career when they get the support. And so a community of practice, and community like where we can discuss these topics of entrepreneurship, cross-cutting issues, and everything that we bring up in our 2 projects, for example. So maybe we should like brainstorm a bit more on that. The other reflection and also like kind of question that I had, it's very much related to the interview that you have done, Carlo, and then the things that you were saying, Michelle, as well. It's like where we saw the interest of the opera house in being more sustainable and the awareness on the topic, and also like being coherent both in the repertoire and in the like how they realize it as well, putting on the stage in production, but also what you said about your students, that you see the interest for social impact and projects that are addressing this kind of issues. And so, and then I am like wondering and reflecting like this, and this is a question to you all, would it be like fair for us to assume or to ask ourselves if composers can actually make a claim or condition their participation or artistic products to the sustainability of an opera house or concert hall or an institution? Or should they actually make this kind of claim? Or should we like promote this idea that it's fair to condition your participation or the availability of your project to the other side? So that is my question, reflection, whatever, to everyone here.
Could I just say one small thing that comes to mind, Emma? Nice to see you again as well, Diana. It's a great question, and I'll just say one quick answer of something that comes to mind, which is that longitudinal research project that I mentioned as part of the START project, one of our main findings from that is that we asked students in their final year, what career plans did you have when you arrived? And then we said, and what career plans do you have now? So of course the data is not very clean because we're asking people to remember. But when you run the statistics on that, there's a significant change in that students often come in with the intention of being in an opera house or an orchestra, and by the time they're in year 4, their intentions are much more towards thinking about setting up their own project or business or doing something to do with entrepreneurship. So it does show that there is absolutely a need to accommodate that kind of change in career intention while students are studying, that they come in wanting to do one thing and they leave planning to do something else.
Fantastic. Carlo.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to share this reflection, and maybe Roberta can even help me to do that. Well, I think that in terms of relation between the artist and the opera house, I don't think the point is the artist, because it is a way to say that the artist, I mean, does not have too much power and the contractation and the contract with the opera house. I mean, for me, it's really a matter of the institution. I don't want to like always like put in this way, but it is a matter of the institution that shall like make pressure on the not only of the opera house but the cultural center in order to respect some ecological indicators. And so here we come back to one point that I'm really into that. It is a matter of giving new indicators of value to cultural center, because if the success of these places is just economical, and they have to demonstrate that they are a good center because they sell 1,000 tickets more, we are losing the point. The point is about new indicators, and new indicators means like new ecological indicators, social indicator, and even culture indicators. So I mean, like, I think that the most contracting part is between the institution and the cultural center. What the artist can do, of course, is making pressure, not only like in the direct contractation, because I think that in this situation they risk to lose even a working position, but it's a matter of like how pressure they can do on the society. And so like altogether making like a bigger pressure on the institution that then back can introduce new way of measuring the success of these places.
Thank you, Carlo. That's really interesting. I'm going to quickly lead into Chris.
Hello. Thanks everyone for really interesting inputs today. Very thought-provoking, really fascinating. I think I might be about to say some of the same sorts of things that Carlo was saying, but from the perspective of someone in one of these institutions. And I think actually it's, I think the sort of entrepreneurialness of composers in sort of understanding that if you get the pitch right, you're going to be pushing at an open door, that actually these concerns that have been discussed today are very much the concerns of institutions, and quite often what we're looking for is the innovative, creative way of doing something meaningful in this area. So rather than having to drag us kicking and screaming into this arena, actually that dialogue with artists is about working together to co-create something that's really really starts to unlock some progress on those issues. And I think, there's lots of examples in all of these cross-cutting issues that we've spoken about today. Theatre Green Book in the UK is quite a good example of how theatres are banding together collectively to start to map out what that future for sustainable production looks like. But that sort of additive process of how we can work, we certainly like to be pushed, right, by composers and creative teams. We want people to be stretching us, but again, if that sort of pitching so that it's about a spirit of collaboration. And I think one of the great things that the sort of smart composers who understand all of that sort of complex strategic and cultural dynamics that are going on, that are going to be behind the decision making that some of these bigger institutions have to make. I thought Bernard's sort of project Cassandra is an absolute masterclass in how that can be done, and of course that partnership with La Monnaie is and will be incredibly fruitful. Yeah, really interesting. That's my bet anyway.
That's brilliant, Chris. Thank you so much. I would like to just give Ebba a final, Diana a final word, and then I'll just wrap up because we've just got a couple of minutes left.
Yes, I'll be very brief, but I would just like to emphasize that music in itself is actually a very sustainable consumption field. So we shouldn't forget that. And if we don't use any computers or big opera houses and stuff like that, we can emphasize the sustainability in the art itself also, not to be forgotten.
That's a brilliant idea. Diana, final.
Very final. I was just actually very happy about hearing Chris' comments, because you're actually connecting between our first webinar with the focus on cooperation and our next webinar with the focus on networking. So stay with us.
Brilliant, Dana. Thank you so much. And that gives me an opportunity to say again, thank you so much to all of our speakers. I'm just going to go through very quickly. Thank you so much, Carlo, for highlighting this brilliant importance of what you said, transdisciplinarity, and dealing with what you said, the complexity of the reality of the music industry. You articulated that very well. Your interview with Bernard, very great questions. You really got elicited something really interesting there. Him sharing his project, which so skillfully combined this kind of personal resonance of an artistic vision with the social impact. Also, thank you so much to Michelle for putting into context the START project, which sounds absolutely brilliant. How artist entrepreneurs can create social value, as you articulated, when they are well prepared to engage with the world outside of academia. And as you said, when they are given the tools to go out and change the world, specifically the tools that they'll need so urgently at the end, at the beginning of their course seemed inspired to me. Thank you, Ebba, again for outlining the Key Change Pledge and the ways that gender equality is being manifested in the industry from a Swedish perspective, and this fascinating exchange which has allowed us to hear from so many different people, from so many different stakeholders from around this industry. Thank you so much. Please share what you've learnt here. We are all on social media, the EU Smart Composers on Twitter and Facebook at EU Smart Composer, and please feel free to come to our next week's webinar, which is hosted by our French partners Le Labat and the Abbé aux Dames, and they'll be introducing the subject of networking next Wednesday, the 22nd of June at 2 p.m. Central European Time. All that's left for me to say is thank you again so much for being here, and take care. Bye.